Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. Here for a special radio roundtable edition of the Pelicans Podcast in our new studio. Todd Graffagnini, radio voice of the Pels. Erin Summers, team and sideline reporter, and the ever-so-famous Jim Eichenhofer from Pelicans.com. How's everybody doing?
This is fantastic.
You like this?
Gentlemen and lady, I mean, what a setup we have here. This is first class all the way.
I like that.
Yeah, doing good. You know, offseason is underway. I'm sure Graf has played golf a few times.
Actually, I haven't, but I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Jim, you and I have been at it doing player profiles and stuff, and a lot of this offseason is going to be obviously dependent on new leadership has been, come here to the New Orleans Pelicans. Joe Dumars, the new executive vice president of basketball operations, April 22nd, he was officially introduced. Todd, we'll start with you. The biggest takeaway when you heard Joe Dumars, just to, talk to us.
Well, I think what jumped out at me was that I don't think he would be here unless he believed he could put out a winner in New Orleans. And he made it abundantly clear that he wasn't looking for another job. I thought that was really significant because when you have a job like he did, and look, it's pretty important. You're in New York. You're working directly, basically under the commissioner. And why would you want to leave? And he said he wasn't looking. He wasn't trying to leave. And the opportunity presented itself. And the fact that he came down here and him being from Louisiana, I think had a lot to do with it as well. But I don't think he would be here unless he thought he could win because of the situation he was in up in New York. Mm-hmm. And that was really the biggest thing that I took out of it.
I think for me what stood out is his continuous references to a standard. He wants to build a championship culture here, and it starts with that standard. He said, you cannot allow things to just slide. That's not elite anything. And if you're looking to play elite basketball, all those little things matter. He was very adamant about, you're not going to be able to move me off of high standards. And I think when you were trying to build a culture, establishing what those standards are is extremely important, especially coming off a season where you went 21-61. So what is that going to look like?
Right.
And I was really interested just to hear how adamant he was about that, the culture, building the person and the player. And they have to be kind of one and the same. You want to be around good people, but people that are also going to be talented. But it both matters.
It's funny to say this based on a press conference during a podcast that we're recording, but right. To me, one of the biggest things I took away was just his mentality of actions are louder than words. One of the things messages that seemed like he repeated and stressed a few times was just, it doesn't really matter what we talk about. It doesn't really matter, what kind of messaging we send. Some of the, marketing stuff, it's all about coming in here kind of to what Erin just spoke about, just reinforcing every single day that this is what we're going to do. And it doesn't really matter that much if we say we're going to do something and by the fourth or fifth day we veer away from that. I mean, the players can see that you're not following up on what you promised was going to happen. So, I mean, to me, that was the biggest thing, was just him just saying basically like, what we talk about doesn't matter. It's what we do.
Kind of based on what you guys are saying, let's maybe be a little specific in this aspect of it. And we'll start with you. Mm-hmm. Is there something specific you would like to see him either address or in general that you're looking forward to maybe with his experience or expertise that he brings to the club?
Yeah, playing off of what Jim said, it's the actions that are coming after what he said. So he said he wants to build a championship culture. What does that look like in terms of the players that you're bringing on the court and putting together? Is it going to be through the draft? Is it going to be through free agency over the summer? What is our starting lineup going to look like next year? What kind of basketball are you going to be playing? Currently, you still have your head coach in Willie Green, and you know what he likes to do. So are you going to kind of put your opinion in as well and try to mold the on-court product? So I'm just curious to see how much emphasis he has on the X's and O's when he does obviously bring in different players here as well.
Yeah, I agree. And if you're talking about, are you going to be involved with the X's and O's type or the mentality part of it? And that's where, I'm getting into toughness and accountability, exactly what Joe Dumars was all about when he was a player and an executive with the Detroit Pistons. I mean, look, the guy's been a winner his entire life. And, you know, at the end of his tenure in Detroit, it didn't go that well. Well, you know, everybody has their good years and their down years. But this guy won as an executive. He won a world championship. They went to 2 consecutive finals.
Right.
You know, he was the executive of the year. So he knows what he's doing. I just think a lot of it has to do with some off-the-court stuff as well. And is he going to inject his personality and his beliefs into what type of roster he builds throughout his tenure here?
Yeah, and another thing on his resume, when he was with Detroit and as an executive, they made the Eastern Conference Finals 6 years in a row.
Correct.
Pelicans are still looking for their first trip to the conference finals, so I think that's another thing that I've thought about. To me, the thing that I'm looking forward to the most about him, I think, is having a new set of eyes, and there's also other people that are going to be joining the front office as well. I think we've seen, I've been here long enough to have gone through different regime changes. I think sometimes you need a different group of people, not only to just have a different perspective, but also if you think about it, they're not married to any of the previous moves.
Correct.
It doesn't matter who was drafted where. None of these players were people that Joe Dumars drafted. None of the trades that have happened were because of him. So I think sometimes when you bring in an entire group of people that don't have connections to what's been here before, they can be a little bit more objective and say, okay, this is what we should do, and this is what's best for the franchise. We're not factoring in that I can't trade this guy because I drafted him, or I can't, change this guy's role because I made a free agent signing and invested a lot of money in him. I like that part of it, and I look forward to seeing how that's going to affect the way that they approach how the roster looks next season.
And look, I don't want to jump topics here, but going back to the original one about the press conference, and he talked about not only on the discipline side of things being with the NBA, but also dealing with every other team. I thought that was very interesting as well because, I mean, you think about it, he said he dealt with every team, good, bad. So do you learn what to do and what not to do, even though, again, he was an executive for a long, long time, but kind of being outside of it all and having to deal with those teams individually, what do you learn from what some teams are doing and what some teams are not doing? I thought can only help.
It gives you a different perspective for
Correct.
sure.
Yeah.
Kind of having a new set of eyes, but being out of that front office role for a team, maybe he has a different look and different approach this time around.
Yeah, no doubt. When you're an executive on your own team, you're kind of locked in and focused what's happening inside of the walls. But when you're dealing with all the
He
other,
saw what
29,
every
30
other
teams,
executive was doing on a daily basis and
by the
dealt
way,
with
there's
them.
been big trades and big moves and things of that nature. Jim, I want to start with you on this because we're doing the Pelicans podcast and doing player profiles. And while we're doing that, we're talking with some people that cover the team, analysts and stuff. In particular, Antonio Daniels brought up a player that maybe could really benefit from the experience and personality and background of a Joe Dumars. So for this next topic, when we think of a player that maybe might benefit the most from having a Joe Dumars in the building, what do you think it is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to see what kind of relationship that Joe Dumars has with Herb Jones, because I feel like he's a very similar background. I mean, he's a defense-first guy. I feel like, they're both from the South. I feel like they have kind of a similar mentality, even if maybe their personalities aren't exactly the same.
Do they like to fish?
I was going to
think
think the same thing.
We got to ask Joe Dumars that. We got to find out if he'll go out on some fishing trips with Herb. But yeah, I think that's one of the guys that stands out to me is Herb Jones. I'm also really curious to hear what Joe Dumars thinks of Trey Murphy in terms of just the potential that he has, the high ceiling that he has. Trey Murphy has a lot of positive characteristics and intangibles, I think, off the court that Joe Dumars will appreciate as well. So I think those are two of the guys that I'm curious to see what Joe's perspective is on them.
Okay, wait. Who
You're
did
killing me,
Antonio
Jim.
Daniels say? Because you brought him up. Who did he
I think
say?
DeJounte Murray, wasn't it? They brought it
I
up
thought
too?
it was Herb, but
Okay. Well, that was going to be my guy regardless.
See,
So we'll get into that. Yeah.
I was thinking that Antonio might have gone with Zion Williamson because of the standard that we have set here, not allowing things to slip, really holding people accountable. And I think we've seen, obviously, got suspended this year for being late. So there are things that maybe he can be a little better about. So maybe Joe will kind of get on him on that in that regard.
What do you want me to say? I mean, you're just stealing my thunder. I was going to say Herb or Zion or Herb. I think Herb could benefit greatly. Look, we don't know what's going to happen in the offseason, but obviously Herb was rendered, out of the year basically by week 1. But you would think that Herb Jones is going to be a core member of this organization moving forward. He's got all the qualities of leadership, ability, off the court. He's got it all, and I think that mirrors Joe Dumars to a T. But then you go on the Erin side, and you talk about Zion and what kind of year he had when he came back from injury, which is what you would hope moving forward, other than that little blip in Philadelphia. If that can get corrected, then you see what type of player that we witnessed the last few months of the season.
Yeah. And I could throw somebody else out there in Jose Alvarado, because Joe Dumars as a player himself was a shooting guard, but he was defense first. He knew he really had to hang his hat on that to get the minutes, and then really leaned into being that offensive threat as well. But he used his intensity and his toughness, but he used it in the right way. And I think maybe Jose can channel that a little bit better, because sometimes he does tend to get upset throughout the game and kind of lets a play go by him because he's arguing about a call or feels like he got nicked or has an injury he's dealing with. And so maybe kind of channeling his emotions and kind of figuring out that balance.
Right.
You maybe get some advice.
Look, and you look at that championship team in 2004 that he built in Detroit. It's no household names, but all were tough, and they just won. They just got the job. I mean, Ben Wallace and Rasheed Wallace and Chauncey Billups and Rip Hamilton. I mean, those guys weren't what you would call Hall of Fame players, but together as the way they worked, and that he basically built the Pistons in his own image as a player, and that's what I think he's going to bring here.
I think everything that you guys said is why I'm so excited about DeJounte Murray with that too, right? He knows what a standard is going to be. Every time he talks to us, and it's all about basketball, team, and getting everybody to play on one, side of the ball, on both sides of the ball. But really, the other thing that really stands out to me too with him is he's going to be a guy that absolutely comes in and works no matter what. I know it's going to be a while before he plays, but he's a defensive-minded guy like you were talking about with Herb Jones. He's a guy that wants to be a leader, and also is a guy that's a point guard that I think could really get into what made Joe Dumars a championship, guard at that level and stuff. So I'm excited, from that aspect of it. But Erin, when you look at and think of veteran Pels players coming into this summer, is there a Pels player that stands out to you more than any other that needs to have an important and a big summer in the lab, as they like to call it?
Well, unfortunately, there's not a lot to choose from, because a lot of them are going to be rehabbing from injuries, so they're not going to be able to take the time to really dive into what they need to get better. But yeah, hopefully throughout the summer, they can still, watch film, work on some things, and come in ready to go. But I think Jordan Hawkins, playing off of even the Joe Dumars toughness aspect of it, could really build on that area of his game. He said it before the last game of the season when I spoke to him, that he needed to put on some weight. He needed to be able to take contact a little bit better, because at times he was thrown off because of that. He needs to be a little more aggressive going to the hoop and more consistent with his shot. Overall, he just needs to get healthy as well. And I think then you can build on those other things. We saw flashes of Hawk being what he can be as in terms of that elite shooter. He definitely elevated his defensive game this past season, but it's the health that he needs to make sure he can get right with the back, and then build in some of those areas, put a little weight on, bring a little more toughness next season. And he said he's going into year 3, like, this is it. He is ready to attack the summer. And I think the last 2 seasons, left a lot to be said. And I think he wants to answer a lot of those questions this next year.
Yeah, Jordan Hawkins, I think, is an excellent pick for this category. I mean, if you think about it, among the younger guys on the team too, he was the one. There were so many players on this team this season that got a greater opportunity to contribute and play because of injuries. He was really one of the guys that was negatively affected in terms of the opportunity was there for him to play more than he did as a rookie, but because of his own injuries, he was prevented from doing that. He only played in 56 games. And so I think this is a huge summer. I mean, another thing too is the fourth year is his team option is still TBD for that. So we'll see what decision they make in that area as well. So I think it's important for him to have a really good summer and be able to build off of what he's done his first 2 years and make a bigger jump than what he did from year 1 to year 2.
I'm not, deflecting the question. Jordan Hawkins is outstanding as far as a pick. But just to where Erin started, those guys that are coming off of injury, I think the summer is huge for them. They've got to attack their rehab, and they've got to come back healthy. An Achilles with DeJounte, that's a little bit different than what Trey and Herb are going through. But as you all well know, if those three guys are not healthy on this team, it is almost impossible to win consistently. They have got to come back 100% at some point. Herb and Trey have a much better chance of coming back when you're heading into training camp. DeJounte, it's going to be a little bit later than that. But those three have to really, really do whatever they need to do to be back 100%, because that gives the team the best chance to win. Those three guys are core pieces of this team. And that's, again, I'm not trying to deflect, but them coming back healthy, those three especially, are going to be absolutely huge.
No, I mean, I think it's a very valid point that, of maybe all the years I've been here, this might be the one where we're most closely trying to track the progress of guys during the offseason, because unfortunately, not only did the injuries affect last season and the team's performance there, but hopefully it doesn't bleed too much into next season. But I do think, obviously with DeJounte's case, it's unavoidable that it's going to affect the start of his season. But hopefully, besides him, there won't be too many other guys where we're talking about this in training camp. Hopefully most of the other players will be able to be ready and have kind of a quote-unquote normal start to the season.
And even on the defensive end, what not having Herb Jones and DeJounte Murray on the court at the same time does to your defense. Let's be honest, it wasn't a good defense at all. It was bottom of the league.
Yep.
But a lot of that had to do was because they weren't out there. And, that's why I just think it's really important for them to come back.
I think one of the other things, too, guys, is those guys are super important. You know how I feel about DeJounte Murray, maybe that relationship with Joe Dumars, Trey Murphy. We've talked about it in a podcast already. Is he an all-star caliber player, right? And Herb Jones, very key. And
Trey really improved his defense and rebounding as the year went on. We saw what his scoring did. It just skyrocketed when he was on that roll in the middle of the season. But to see him rebounding the basketball and defending, being into a more rounded player that they hoped when he was drafted a few years ago that he was going to turn into. And that's another guy that has an opportunity to really, really, even though he exploded last year, he's got a chance to take an even bigger step this season.
But I don't want to be Captain Obvious. Is it not Zion? Because those three players coming back make this team a good team. Zion makes this team a special team. We saw in that second half of the season before he got injured, falling down on the court hard, he got his first 2 career triple-doubles. Now, that injury that he suffered, Todd, as you called it and saw it there towards the end of the season, was contusion, right? He landed on the ground. That means I'm thinking he should spend most of the summer, right? He's capable. I guess I'm saying he's not a player that's having surgery or waiting 3-4 months and things of that nature. And look, you look at, and we started with what we started this podcast with Joe Dumars coming in now, different eyes. Well, let's look at, what a summer for him's going to be like, right? Adding to his game, showing what he will be ready for in October. I think he's somebody for sure.
The key right now is just for him is maintaining where he ended the season.
Yeah.
No slippage. Slippage. He was in the best shape of his life. Even his freshman year of Duke, maybe.
Sure.
And we saw the all-around game, which is what we have been waiting for 6 years. We saw it come to fruition in the last couple of months of the season. And the way that they really managed his minutes. John and I talked about this all the time on the broadcast. Moving forward, going into next season, how they're going to manage his minutes. Are they going to remain at the 28 to 32, or are they going to bump it up a little bit? Now, if he's in tremendous shape, like he was at the end of the year, you would assume that they'd bump it up. But if you're going to score 30 points a game playing 28 minutes a game, right, why take any chances, especially during the regular season when you're trying to get at least 65 to 70 games out of them? That to me is going to be a huge storyline going into next year, especially if he comes into training camp looking like he did at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think that's the key for him, showing up in elite shape as we saw him this past season and being ready to go. I don't know that we need to see that much more out of his game in terms of growth. You could argue, okay, maybe he can get a little better from outside. Maybe he needs to develop a midi and be more consistent there. But he is pretty dang good where he's at. So I don't know he needs to have this huge jump. It's more so making sure that you do show up ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah, I mean, I think every offseason is important for him, but it's just a matter of just repeating what he did last offseason and just continuing to build on that. I feel like everyone should be happy with in terms of his conditioning and the shape that he was in. If he just repeats the exact same thing, I think we'll be very happy.
All right, so we had a handful of players there as to players that need to have good summers. They were all injured too, Todd, and that allowed younger players, rookies, to step in and get some minutes on the floor here. So year two players going into year two. What are you most excited to kind of see? I'm
going with my guy, Carlo. I mean, if John DeShazer was here, he'd be bumping for him early. But look, Carlo Makovich proved that he can play in the NBA. He proved that he can make an impact. The ceiling is up here. I mean, way high. He's got to improve on things. His 3-point percentage was a little low, but he was over 50% from the floor. He was a 77% free throw shooter. So that's pretty solid. That could go up a little bit, but he's big. He's athletic. He can step outside and make threes. He can rebound. He's had a couple of double-doubles in there at the end of the season. And Gus, he can finish at the rim. And that's the type of player that we've been looking for a long time around here. And just for him to get a taste, of it. And he had to have finished the year going, I can do this. I can be a major factor on this team. I'm an NBA player, and that should give him nothing but confidence going into the offseason.
For me, I got to go with Yves Missi because he came in this year and ownership, front office said that it would be a developmental year for him. And he spent a lot of time in the G League. He only had 1 year playing in college at Baylor. He was supposed to be basically a red shirt, and then they ended up playing him. He came in and, when needed, due to injury, stepped in, and honestly, he didn't really miss a beat. He was a lot further ahead in training camp than we saw him in summer league, and throughout the season, he continued to build off of that. He did hit a rookie wall, which is understandable. He hadn't played that much basketball, but Missi has the intelligence that you want to see from a player in terms of you show him one thing one time and he'll do it the next. Yeah. He learns very quickly. And I think that having a full summer to take in everything that was coming at him this past year, he is going to show up as such a more confident player and understanding the game better in terms of where he needs to be defensively, spacing on the offensive side, and then more confident in his shot and around the rim, which is an area that I think he needs to definitely take a step in.
Erin and I are on the same page today because for this one I had Yves Missi as well as the rookie going into his second year, where I think this offseason is the most important. One of the things that's interesting looking at the Pelicans roster, he's actually more than 2 years younger than everyone else on the roster this season, if you think about it. So I think, as Erin referenced, I mean, he's just at a different stage of his basketball development than everyone else is in terms of he hasn't even been playing that long. So I think in some ways there's just more upside for him. There's more different areas where he can improve. There's a lot of things that he still has, not that he hasn't learned, but just things that he can keep getting better at. And so, I mean, I like Carlo as a pick as well. He's 24. Antonio Reeves is 24 as well. Yves Missy's 20, going on 21 this month. So I think we're going to see not just maybe this summer, but the next few he's going to keep making strides because, as Erin referenced, he's a really smart guy, and he just has all these tools that I think we're going to keep seeing him develop and bring some of that stuff more and more to the table.
Interesting. We went with centers. It's been a while, right, since we were looking forward to second-year players in that position to be big. All right, so Jim, I don't know if many people know that you have the direct number to Adam Silver. So
I didn't even know
you're
that.
apparently going to pitch to him the best case or the reason why the New Orleans Pelicans should have the fortune of going right now currently fourth, based on win-loss record, to maybe third or second, overall winning the lottery less than 2 weeks away, May 12th. What is your case?
My case is that the Pelicans had some of the worst luck that I've seen, not only in the NBA this season, but really over the last 2 decades in terms of how many injuries they had. And it wasn't just the injuries, it was just the fluky, terrible luck that they had. So I feel like if you take all of, there's different components of luck and misfortune. If you add those all together, I feel like I can't even comprehend what happened to New Orleans this season. So they're due for some positive luck, I think, after what they just experienced. They had the second most injuries and games missed of any team in the NBA. Philadelphia actually had more, which I don't even understand how that's possible. But so that would be my pitch, basically, is that they're due some luck. And it's interesting too. I looked up, if you go back and look at, in 2012, the Pelicans had a 13.7% chance of winning the lottery and won it. And then with Zion in 2019, they had a 6% chance. So this is kind of in the middle somewhere, but we'll see. They basically have a 1 in 8 chance of winning it.
I like that. It's easy enough. 1 of 8, Erin.
I can't be more eloquent than that.
I had it written down. No one had worse luck than we did.
Well,
So,
if you think
enough.
we didn't. I know we're going to talk about last year in a bit, but it just Willie Green. Would come to the podium after games and just shake his head after one of these devastating fluke injuries that took place, and it's like, what do you do? And look, I'll make a case for that, but anybody but Utah, because they went about it absolutely the wrong way.
Right.
And karma at some point has to take over.
One of the best ways that you could sum up the luck that the Pelicans had too is in the season podcast reviews that we're doing on individual players. I can't even count how many times in what I wrote about a player it was, well, he wasn't supposed to play very much, but
Right.
Yves Misy led the team in games played.
Right.
Who expected a rookie that was picked 21 overall to play in more games than anyone else on the team? Who expected a 2-way contract guy like Brandon Boston to play as much as he did and he was a leading scorer in some few games? So, that just kind of sums it up. You can look across the board and see how the luck affected not only the team overall, but just a bunch of individual players.
Yeah, never seen anything like it, right? Normal injuries, that's not exactly what this team happened. It's crazy. All right, so one of the last things we're going to do here is put a wrap in a bow on this season and maybe give me something, Todd, that you're looking forward to 25-26 season here.
Well, we're going to see what the roster is going to look like when we go into training camp. I'm just, last year is over with. We didn't know it at the time, but it was doomed from opening week. We just didn't know it at the time, but you did not lose the amount of players that we lost in a very short amount of time at the beginning of the season and be able to overcome that. It was impossible. It was impossible. Jim, I was looking at the numbers from last year too. I didn't even realize also that Brandon Ingram, who of course is no longer on the team, but he only played 18 games last year. He went down in December. Little did another, injury caused by an opponent, Lou Dort. But I'll, won't go into that. What are you going to do? You lost Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, DeJounte Murray, and C.J. McCollum within 4 games. Zion got hurt 2 games after that, and Brandon Ingram played 10 more games, and that was it.
Yeah, I think to me what I want to see next – well, first let me start with my message to last season, which is good riddance.
Good riddance.
I never want to see you again. I'm so glad you're gone.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as what I want to see in 25-26, to me the biggest thing is just showing that the season that we just went through was a fluke,
right,
and it was caused by a lot of bad luck that we just detailed, and that the franchise is on the right track, and that it can get back to the winning ways of the previous couple of years, where they had a winning record 2 years in a row. They made the playoffs in 22. So I feel like there was a trajectory that they were on where they're getting better every season at the start of Willie Green's time here. And just get back to that. Just kind of show, I mean, maybe Memphis isn't a great example because of the way that the Grizzlies ended their season, but if you think about what they did, where they had one season where they had a ton of injuries, but then they went right back to being the kind of team that can win 45, 50 games, and you see that they're competitive in the West. That's what I want to see. I definitely don't want to put a number on how many wins they need to get next season, because there's a ton of factors that we've also already discussed in terms of the way they're going to start next season, and it's going to be a little bit disjointed, I think. But I just want to see overall people be able to say at the end of next season, okay, they're headed in the right direction, and that they're going to be competitive for the near future with a bunch of young guys that they can build around.
Last year was devastating. Really, it was for everybody. I think it was tough for the fans. It was hard for us covering it every night. You know, another injury, and you're trying to pump up these younger players and trying to infuse positivity into what we're seeing happen. And it was tough. And I think that one thing that can be said about the culture in the Pelicans locker room already is that those players didn't give up. And they continued to come to practice and work hard and listen to Coach Green. And Coach Green continued to coach. And they continued to show up and really put forth a good effort almost every night. And there were a couple a handful of them throughout the season where, Trey Murphy goes down and the game's kind of a wash, which is understandable. But I think that this team already has a good culture in that locker room. And I think that if you tweak a couple areas like Joe Dumars is talking about, you add some more pieces, I don't think you're that far off.
I'm going to echo both of you. You're exactly right. And you're not that far off because, look, the Western Conference is tough. We all know that. But if you're 500, you're in the mix. You are in the mix. It's not like you need 50 wins or 55 wins. If you're 42 or 41 and 41, you're in some form of postseason. Now, you want to be top 6, obviously, but not putting a number on it. But if you look at the teams that were 7 through 10, they don't have 50 wins. They don't. We were just so far underneath, underground, we had no chance. But if you just are steady and are consistent, you're going to be in the mix at the end of the year. But just to echo, it's got to be on the defensive end. It's got to be. That's why these teams were successful in the first couple years of Willie Green's tenure. The offense wasn't always there, but if you're defending night in and night out, you're going to give yourself a chance to win games at the end of the game, no matter what the situation's going to be. But if you're giving up 125 points a game, you have no chance. So it's got to start on the defensive end, and that's why it was just so hard when you lost Herb and DeJounte, in the first week of the season, because that's a big part of you. I mean, you go back to the year before about the deflections and the steals. I mean, we're top 2 in the league in that department, and DeJounte Murray is one of the best steal / deflection guys in the NBA, and you lost that on opening night. So I just think it starts defensively.
All right, so good gumbo. Need a couple of ingredients and a good recipe, right? So what you're talking about with the defensive end, and you guys talked about with the different players and stuff, you got an EVP that loves defense and physicality, a coach is like that. You guys brought up second-year players at the center position, a position that this franchise has been looking for, excited about it. Jim, during our podcast, we've talked about some of these players that got opportunity, made the most minutes, were very competitive. You're excited about that. And as far as our starters that didn't play, do we have an all-NBA defensive person? Got some all-star players, right? I'm saying top 6 next year.
I like it. Bold.
Because you can't possibly, like you just said, have the same luck that you had this year. I mean, you can't possibly lose, as you said, in a week's worth of time, 4 of your 5 starters, right?
It was over.
I mean, you can't.
No,
so if that doesn't happen,
obviously
it's how quickly these guys come back from injury and are ready to play. But some of these injuries, I think these players, Erin, will come back before training camp. And if they do, We'll wait for DeJounte here, hold the fort down. We got Jose and a couple of other players that can do that. Zion can run the point. If you can do that, then he comes in, gives you some energy. Why not make a push and get a top 6 spot next year?
I'm all for it. And there are a couple teams above us right now that are going to be dismantling over the summer. So it's going to take some of the competition out of it. They're going to be in rebuild mode. So,
I mean, to what Graff said, too, last 3 seasons, they finished 6th in defense, and then 29th. So They have to get back to at least the middle of the pack defensively, especially in the West. I mean, I'd have to look this up, but I'm guessing hasn't been a team that's finished 20th or worst in defense in the West over the last however many years and done anything with that. It's impossible to overcome that.
All right, we welcome in now Emmy winner and very, very, very good documentary filmmaker, Mr. Zak Levitt here, who, man, I got to tell you, I have top 3 lists, Zach, but they're normally like top 3 restaurants over to go eat or places to hang out. You're, 3 documentaries, man, that I enjoy is The Dream Team, The Doctor, and The Bad Boys. It's hard to beat those top 3.
Well, I appreciate that. After 10 years or so, the fact that people are still talking about it and still remember those films is it's really cool for me to hear that. And thank you for having me. Thank you for speaking with me.
Obviously, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on was because Joe Dumars is now our new executive vice president of basketball operations here with the Pelicans. And you can't think of Joe Dumars without obviously thinking of the Bad Boys. And one thing that really stood out to me in a previous interview you had, Zach, was with the Dream Team. You're talking to Scottie Pippen. And I thought it was interesting. You said you could tell when you were talking to Scottie, he still had a certain, dislike when it came to the Bad Boys in the Pistons in that era there that maybe got you started thinking of wanting to do the Bad Boys doc. How did that kind of come about a little bit, Zach?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the timing. I think that the Bad Boys was always something that ESPN wanted to do. But that interview with Scottie certainly didn't hurt the process there as far as understanding that we would have the ability to tap into the animosity that other players had for the Bad Boys. And, to see Scottie all those years later still have such strong negative feelings for those guys, it really spoke to the rivalry that they had and the physicality of it. And certainly Scottie took the brunt of it early on. And of course they came back to beat the Pistons, but you know how the NBA is, you don't get to be a champion without paying your dues and without taking your lumps. And the Bulls clearly took their lumps from the Pistons. And they've all gone on the record, as far as I know, certainly Michael has gone on the record saying that they wouldn't have won championships without what they learned from facing Detroit in that era. But yeah, I think that it's a pretty easy connection to make to see the way Scottie responded to just, when I sort of threw out the idea of Isaiah and the Bad Boys, to see the way he responded, understanding that if he was so outspoken all these years later, others wouldn't. It would certainly be a compelling film.
Yeah, I think people that followed the NBA back in the 80s, 90s during Joe Dumars' playing career, they would definitely not expect kind words to be exchanged between Bulls players from that era and Pistons players from that era, even, this many years later. But one of the things I loved about the Bad Boys documentary that you guys did too was all of the interviews with the Pistons players, including obviously the entire team that played with Joe Dumars. I was wondering from your experience of doing those interviews, what it was like to hear some of the players on that team describe Joe Dumars as far as, he seems like a different personality from some of the other guys, but it just seems like they have a ton of reverence for him as a player, but also just as a person too.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. If you look back at it, I mean, when you're at that level in sports, and certainly I've never been close to that, but just speaking as an observer and somebody who's spoken to so many of the athletes who've played at that level, you do what it takes to win, right? the Pistons they didn't have Michael Jordan on the team. They didn't have Magic Johnson on the team. They weren't the most athletic team. They weren't the smoothest, most fluid team. And so they recognized early on what they needed to do to win. And that was to just be more physical than the other teams, to work harder, to essentially do the things that they could control, right? Play incredible defense, get on the floor, be as active as possible, be pests. And they leaned into that. So, hence the bad boys, right? That's the impetus of that culture and that approach to the game, sort of owning that label. If the league is going to hate us, we're gonna lean into that. And when you look at the roster of the bad boys in that time, and you just sort of go down the line, Lambeer, Rodman, Isaiah, even John Sally, these guys, Rick Mahorn, these guys that could get under your skin quicker than anybody. It makes sense. But then you look at the roster, you continue to look at the roster, and you see Joe Dumars. And that one didn't really make sense, because anybody who's met Joe or who knows Joe knows what a kind person he is, how upstanding he is, what a great sportsman he is. Still had all of those attributes as far as his defensive approach to the game and his hustle and all of the other things that he could control his effort. But he wasn't somebody that was going to needle you on the court and try to get under your skin and talk smack in your ear like some of the other guys. But what Joe was he was the ultimate teammate. So he wasn't about to isolate himself in any way from his other teammates. And Joe was a bad boy. But when the game ended, he was not one of those guys all those years later that players on other teams like the Scottie Pippins or others would reference as, players that they hated.
Yeah.
They may not have liked playing against him because he was so tough, and just blue collar and just fit the culture of the city and the team so well. But Joe was not a guy that was ever going to do anything that he felt contradicted how he perceived himself, which was as an upstanding, strong, positive influence on the floor. And I think that he carried that with him, not only while he was a player, but as an executive, and certainly to this day, because that's really just who he is.
You mentioned the kind of qualities that he had on and off the court. I think it's also interesting to note that he was the first winner of the Sportsmanship Award, and then the NBA decided to name the award after him. So that kind of gives you an example of just the kind of player he was on the court and the way he carried himself. One of the things I noted from Michael Jordan did a Come Fly With Me, I think was the documentary that he did in the early 90s, and he said Joe Dumars was the toughest guy that he ever had to go against, as far as, one of the best players in the history of the NBA. Obviously, that's such a huge compliment as far as Dumars' defensive ability. But in terms of, there's kind of two eras with Joe Dumars in Detroit. There was his era where they won back-to-back championships as a player, and then as an executive, they won again in 2004. And it was kind of along the same lines as far as the model of that team. It's a bunch of blue-collar guys. There's no huge superstar. It was just kind of something that the city of Detroit, I think, identified with a ton. But as we look back now at him as a player, I kind of laugh, because I think it doesn't make me feel old that there's people that don't remember him as a player. But I think it makes me feel old when I hear people that don't remember the 2004 team, because it doesn't seem like it's that long ago, but it really is. But for somebody that's like 25 right now, they don't remember that era. But I guess I was wondering, from your perspective, what do you think that the two teams that he won a championship with, and maybe even the 2004 team, what do you think they represent in the history of the NBA, or the last 35 years of the NBA, in terms of how they stand out, maybe compared to some of the other teams that have won championships?
Yeah, one word and one word only, defense. And then if you extend that to a few other words, toughness, physically, mentally, work ethic. So this was 11. I'm trying to remember when Bad Boys came out, 2015 maybe or 14. I was with that 2004 team. I spent a week with that team in Detroit, following them and filming the practices. And that was March of that year that they won the title. And I remember telling everybody when I came back that not that I can predict the future, but just having been around the game and seeing what I saw, I thought that team was going to win the title. And it wasn't because they could, score when the game was on the line necessarily, although they did have guys like Rip Hamilton or maybe Tayshaun Prince or guys that certainly could score. But it was their defense. They were holding teams to like low points in the low 70s.
Yeah.
I remember they had a streak there. I don't remember how many games where they were holding teams in the 70s. And this team was built in the image of Joe Dumars and the Bad Boys. What Joe Dumars didn't have was, pure, incredible, eye-popping athletic ability. I mean, that's no secret. He wasn't playing above the rim. He wasn't necessarily making people fall down with his crossovers. It wasn't the stuff that you would see on the highlights, the flashiness, but what he did have was that work ethic and that approach to defense and that tough-minded mentality. Like I said before, the things that he could control, hard work and effort. And he built that 2004 team in that image. If you go down that roster, right? Trying to remember, you had the Wallaces. I mentioned Rip and Tayshaun, Chauncey Billups, of course. You had these guys that were not like the flashiest players that the kids were going to necessarily wear their jerseys.
Right.
But I think that year they may have had 3 or 4 All-Stars as well. But they were built to play defense, and that's what they did. They came in, and nobody expected them to beat the Lakers, and I think they won 4 straight against the Lakers, if I'm not mistaken. And it was because you just couldn't score on them. And Joe took the formula that he had with the Bad Boys that brought success to them, and he took that into his office as an executive, and he built a team that did the same thing. And so the proof is in the pudding. It may not have been the flashiest way or the most exciting way to win basketball games, but just like the Bad Boys, winning is winning, and they're remembered as winners.
Last thing for me, I mean, as we try to, introduce people to Joe Dumars here in New Orleans, there's some people that know a little bit about him because he's a Louisiana native and he spent time here, post-career and that kind of thing. But, I mean, how would you describe just the way that people view him maybe just across the league in terms of, would you say that he's one of the most respected people maybe off the court, on the court from, the years that you worked in the NBA and the years that you've covered the sport?
Yeah, I mean, as you were asking that question, the only word that popped into my mind is respect. I think everybody respects Joe Dumars. You can look at his history and his past. There's not one thing that stands out that is questionable as far as his personality or his the way he treats people. All of my interactions with him, he treated me with the utmost respect. And when you treat others with respect, on top of having the resume that he has, those two things combined make others respect him. So you're looking, especially for players, you're looking at somebody who's a finals MVP, who's won 2 titles, who's won a title as an executive. That commands an incredible amount of respect in and of itself. But when you carry yourself with the demeanor that Joe does, he's thoughtful, he's introspective. People have always said he's quiet, and he is quiet, but I think that maybe behind that quietness, Joe is evaluating and he's thinking and he's he's analyzing things, and I just think all of those things combined make him who he is, and people respect him for it.
Zach, what I think really stands out to me is in his introductory press conference, he spoke about certain things that we can expect, or I guess going to be some principles of his team. And hearing you speak and watching the different documentaries, method to the madness, I think keeps popping in my head too as well, right? I mean, we look at it as, they're just tough, they're bullies and stuff. There's a method to that madness. There's, as he said, there's a standard, and you can use whatever words you want. It's what you do every single day that goes about winning championships and being a winner. I guess what I want to ask you to wrap up here, what I find interesting in the Dream Team, the Doctor, the Bad Boys, these are legendary winners, right? That have marked the history of the NBA. Is there that commonality right there too, that it is madness, but you have to give up, you have to sacrifice, you have to do it together in order to ascertain greatness?
Well, I don't even know. I wouldn't use the word madness, but you did use a word that I would use, which is standard. And I think that, there's a standard to greatness. You don't just become great. There's no easy path. It takes an obscene amount of work at whatever you do, whether you're a corporate CEO or a professional athlete. There are NBA players and then there are the greats, and what separates them is always that standard, that work ethic, right? And that starts from a young age, and it carries you through your life, and that comes from the inside, and Joe saw what hard work was able to afford him in his life and his career. And I think that that's the only way he knows how to do things, is by working harder than everybody else. And I know that that's what he's going to bring to the Pelicans. It's what he's brought to his life and his career up to this point. And I know that that's something that he'll be able to convey to the players because he's done it. He's not just talking about it. He lives it every day. And that standard, I think, is something that he's going to bring to the team that will be an incredibly positive influence.
All right. Multiple Emmy and multiple award documentary filmmaker, Mr. Zak Levitt. Been a pleasure, man. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Good luck.